Welcome to part 9 of Church Planted. I am excited to continue our discussion on leadership. And if you have not listened or watched the previous content, please go back and do so. The content continues to build on itself. And my hope for the content in this section, again, is simple: to encourage you to be the best leader that you can possibly be. And so, recap of last session, as we discussed with pastoral leadership, most of the time, people view leadership as someone at the top leading those who are beneath them. This is what is known as authoritarian leadership. In a former Soviet culture, maybe like what some of you are watching from, you will see this often. You might even be tempted to lead like this, where you're at the top simply telling people what to do. However, I'm going to argue that this is not the way of the Bible. This is not the way of Jesus. Jesus did not lead like this. Jesus did not lead in such a way where he was at the top telling others what to do. In fact, Jesus was a servant leader, and he was also a directional leader. And we introduced the pastor leader, our conversation on the pastor leader last session as being both servant leadership and directional leadership. When both of these lanes come together, we can have what we call maximum kingdom impact, or MKI. So, however, the problem is that none of us are great in both lanes. That's always the issue, isn't it? We always lean one way or the other. We're either heavy directional or heavy servant leadership. And God has designed us to be either more of a servant leader or more of a directional leader. The goal, however, as leaders, is to know ourselves well, to learn ourselves, and to know which lane God has designed each one of us to lead in, and then begin to build a team around our weaknesses. And it might look something like this: your strengths plus the strengths of your team, so hopefully your weaknesses, equal maximum kingdom impact. We also discussed in the last session the APEST model of leadership found in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12. We also talked about the job description of a pastor being to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. This one sentence job description defines the trajectory of the pastor's time, the pastor's schedule, and the pastor's bandwidth to lead the church, to lead your team, to lead your people, and to lead church planting and Great Commission work. And I want you to know that God has called you to do this in one of the following ways. And we're talking about the APEST model. It's either apostolic leadership to extend the work of the gospel, prophetic leadership to defend the truth of the gospel, evangelistic leadership, sharing the saving news of the gospel, shepherd leadership, providing care to others with the gospel, or a teaching leadership, explaining clear or giving clear applications of the gospel. And so again, the first step in pastoral leadership, in any kind of leadership, is to know your strengths. The second step is to build a team around your weaknesses. And the first step to building a team is to develop what we're going to call in this session a leadership pipeline. And so let's define a leadership pipeline together. And remember, this is from session 1, part 1, where we're defining key terms together. And hopefully you've seen how all the content has built on itself up to this point. So a leadership pipeline is a trajectory of leadership starting with the ability to lead yourself and ending with the ability to lead movements. And so think about leadership, or a leadership pipeline, for just a moment as a ladder. With every step up the ladder, you are growing as a leader. As you are developing leaders in the life of your church, you want to have a process that you are taking potential leaders through. And again, this is what we might call a leadership pipeline. And what I want you to see, and how we're going to define a leadership pipeline, is we're going to give it 5 steps. And so the 5 steps of a leadership pipeline are quite simple. Step 1 is leading yourself. I mentioned in a past episode that I once held the belief or conviction that leadership was meant only for the chosen few. But since then, I have turned away from that view, and I believe that everyone can be a leader because God created you and in his image and after his likeness, and God is the main capital L leader, God the Father, and we as humans, as humanity, every single one of us, we can lead ourselves. And so step one is a conversation around leading yourself. Step two, as you begin to lead yourself and you take the next step up that leadership ladder, you begin to find yourself leading people. Maybe in your organization you have someone that reports to you, or maybe now you're leading a team or something like that. And you have maybe 2 or 3 people that report to you in those ways as well. That's what this step points us to. And in so many ways, this step allows us to think in terms of intentionality, but it also happens just naturally as well. When we're leading ourselves, well, other people are going to want to be around us. It's going to create healthy environments and healthy relationships, and we're going to begin to find ourselves leading other people just naturally by how we are leading ourselves. The next step up the leadership ladder is leading teams, and this is where we begin to not just lead people naturally or lead a few, but now we're leading more and more, and we're beginning to see our leadership abilities grow and get to a whole nother level. And then fourthly, as we continue to take that next step up the leadership ladder, we find ourselves leading leaders. And this is where we are leading people who lead others. This is where few of us get to, but it is a real joy and honor to be able to lead other people and lead leaders in such a way like this. And then finally, what I call step 5 here is that final step up the leadership ladder, and it's leading movements. And in so many ways, this is what we see people do in the latter parts of their life or the latter parts of their career. They are reproducing themselves in such a way where just movement is happening. These are movement leaders who are leading at the highest levels. They're leading the highest leaders, and God uses people like this to do amazing things. But I want you to see is that we're all leaders. And every single one of us are at one of these 5 steps, even if that means at this moment we are learning how to lead ourselves well. And so every potential leader in your church begins on step 1. In fact, we all start there. And so I want to take a second and talk through each step for our content today. And we're going to start with step 1 here on the leadership pipeline, or what we might call the leadership ladder, and that's leading yourself. And so in this step, you learn to become a leader by first leading yourself well. This means that you are leading yourself spiritually, physically, emotionally. You're learning to set personal development goals for yourself. At some level, we never leave this step of the ladder. To be a leader, we must also be a learner. Every leader has a lid. Maybe you've heard that said before. And what I mean by this is that every leader can only lead so far as their development has taken them. Our goal is to always be learning and growing and extending that lid further and further through self-discovery, self-growth, mentors, experiences, leadership opportunities, and things like that. In this step of the leadership pipeline, you will always lead yourself by leading the tasks that you give to yourself. Everybody should be faithful with leading tasks before they're given a title. And just kind of a side note here, whenever I am recruiting someone for a team that I am leading or I'm building, I'm always looking to see if they first lead themselves well, or have the opportunity or have the potential or attitude or faithfulness to lead themselves well. And then secondly, are they accomplishing the tasks that I give them? And in my own personal leadership journey, I try to never recruit someone for a team I'm leading or building without first watching them be faithful in those 2 areas. After all, Jesus says in Luke chapter 16, verse 10, if you are faithful with little things, you will also be faithful with much. We'll talk about self-leadership in other ways throughout this course and hopefully in different resources that we produce. This is also a very important qualification for a pastor in 1 Timothy chapter 3, in Titus 1, and in 1 Peter 5. Leaders must not be recent converts, or pastors must not be recent converts, and they must go through a season of testing and observation. So at step 1, you can begin to observe how these potential leaders are faithful at both leading themselves and accomplishing the tasks that have been assigned to them. Okay, let's talk about step 2. Leading people. This is the second step in leadership pipeline. And after we see a season of self-leadership and being faithful with accomplishing tasks that are given to the people that we're leading, we can now begin to give them a title. And everyone in step 2 has a title. Maybe this is a title in your church, like small group leader or prayer group leader or sound/audio leader or something like this. Most of the time, these are volunteers in the life of your church. The goal of this step is to give someone who has been faithful in leading themselves and accomplishing tasks a clear next step for their leadership. This clear next step should only be in the realm of leading others with clear supervision. This is someone on your team that you're now giving tasks to so where they can lead on their own. So let's continue using our example of someone stepping into maybe leading a small group. So for a season, this person was in a small group and in a small group themselves. And under the supervision and direction of the small group leader, they were given a few times maybe to lead the small group. After this, they were able to get feedback from the small group leader. In leadership circles, this person might be called an apprentice. And after they are faithful with the task of leading a few small groups, now they are given the opportunity to be a leader of the small group. At this stage, you can give them a clear job description of what is expected of them when leading this small group of people. This process can be duplicated in any context: worship leadership, small group leadership, pastoral care leadership, kids and youth leadership, and many more as well. So really there's no set time frame for this step. I would encourage you to see people lead others in this step, and you begin to see the fruit of their leadership. When you begin to see the fruit of their leadership, that's how you measure when they are ready for step 3, which is leading a team. So let's talk about leading teams for a moment. This is an important next step for your growth as a leader and for those on your team. And for those of you who are developing into leadership roles like this. In this step, people go from leading others to now leading people who lead others. At this stage, leaders are still providing direction and defining success, but they're not micromanaging the leadership of those in step 2. And so for the sake of our example, let's continue to use the example of our small group leader that we mentioned a moment ago. Maybe someone has been leading a small group now for some time, and you've noticed their success, and you are seeing clear fruit from their leadership. It's at this stage that you want to begin to see this small group leader reproduce himself or reproduce herself into other people. It's at this stage that the small group leader is ready to lead other small group leaders. So in other words, he might step away from his small group after he replaces himself with another leader, but when he steps away from leading the group, he doesn't just say, hey, good luck, go enjoy the small group. No, he steps into a different role of leadership as he steps up the leadership ladder. So instead of just replacing himself and moving on to start something else, he is now leading the leader of the small group. And not just that small group leader, he might now be leading several small group leaders. This would now be a team of small group leaders he is leading. So at this stage, the win is the success of the team and continued development of the team leader. It's at this stage, this might be an associate pastor in your church, an assistant pastor, or maybe even a directional level pastor in the life of your church. And then as we take the next step up the leadership ladder, or this leadership pipeline, let's talk about step 4, leading leaders. At this stage, you go from leading teams to now leading leaders. In other words, it's at this stage you are now really at the highest point of your church or at the highest point of your organization. It's at this stage where most leaders stop growing. It's also at this stage where someone's capacity for leadership is most noticed. This stage is senior pastors or lead pastors or church planters who are sent out to plant churches. And it's at this stage you are leading leaders who build teams that provide leadership to people. This stage is very directional leadership heavy. And however, that does not mean servant leadership should not fit this role or be on this step as well. Some of the best leaders at this level that I know are also heavy on the servant leadership lane. So in fact, as you are leading the leaders on your team or your leadership team, you're giving yourself to them and serving them in so many ways and in any way that you can. Your goals for this stage is for the leaders you are leading to be successful. You want them to be in the right seats. You want them to know their gifts. You want them to know how God's designed them. You want them to know what kingdom impact lane that they run in or lead in. You want them to know their APEST model of leadership. So in so many ways, you're beginning to see yourself as an equiper and leader of leaders. These leaders are not simply accomplishing your vision, but you are allowing them to now have space to lead how God has designed them to lead. So yes, as the point leader, you're setting the pace, you're providing clear direction, but you're not micromanaging those under your leadership. At this level, you have high-level leaders under your care. So think about the leadership pipeline in this way in the life of your church. Step one might be attenders, members, and volunteers. Step two might be one-on-one discipleship or mentors or small group leaders or deacons. Step three might be small group coaches or associate pastors or teachers and trainers. Step four might be the lead pastor or leadership team or elders or organizational leaders. And then step five might even be a network leader of some sort. And then let's finalize this conversation by talking about step five in leadership pipeline, those who lead movements. So in this step, we begin to see people go from leading organizations to now leading movements. This often happens later in life in what I call the legacy stage. Those who have a lifetime of experience often move on from being a lead pastor or a senior pastor to now equipping the church at large. And so let me recap for just a moment. A leadership pipeline is a trajectory of leadership starting with the ability to lead yourself and ending with the ability to lead movements. There are 5 steps to leadership pipeline: leading yourself, leading people, leading teams, leading leaders, and then finally, leading movements. And let me also bring our attention back to the definition of leadership that I gave in session 1, and it's going to be on our screen. Leadership is the art of seeing where, again, I want you to fill in the blank here with a step from the leadership pipeline. Maybe yourself, maybe people, maybe teams, leaders, or even movements need to go, and having the ability to get there. So I hope this definition of leadership, and I think it will, I think this definition of leadership will make much more sense as we put it right beside our leadership pipeline. Leadership is the art of seeing where insert a stage on the leadership pipeline needs to go, and then having the ability to get there. And I hope you see how my definition of leadership is a lifelong journey and a pursuit of leadership through what we call this leadership ladder or a leadership pipeline. And friends, I am praying that you lead yourself well and that God one day uses you to lead movements for his glory alone.